14th birthday of Eric unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers that cast warm gold across the marble floors of the Forrester mansion. A house that had witnessed triumph, betrayal, reconciliation, and reinvention across generations. The evening was designed as a tribute not merely to a man, but to a legacy. Decades of artistry, resilience, and ambition crystallized in the name Forrester. Family members, longtime friends, and loyal colleagues gathered in elegant attire, their smiles polished, their toasts carefully prepared. On the surface, the celebration gleamed with refinement. Beneath that shimmer, however, tension threaded quietly through the room, woven into glances and hushed exchanges that hinted at unresolved fractures within the dynasty. Brooke and Katie stood near the grand staircase, their voices lowered but their expressions far from discreet. Concern for Eric's health, once a private matter, had become a point of visible discord. Brooke's worry was rooted in recent signs of fatigue she could not ignore. The tremor in Eric's hand when lifting a glass, the pause in his breath between sentences, the way he leaned more heavily than usual against the banister. Katie, equally alarmed yet more pragmatic, insisted that public displays of anxiety only weakened Eric's authority in front of employees and investors. What began as concern escalated into confrontation. Their argument, though restrained in volume, radiated through the atmosphere like static electricity. Guests felt it. Ridge noticed. Steffy stiffened. The party's elegance began to fray. Eric observed the exchange from across the room. He had spent a lifetime commanding attention, shaping fabrics into statements, turning vision into empire. Yet tonight, as whispers of his fragility circulated in his own home, something hardened behind his eyes. He did not resent their worry, he resented what it implied. To be discussed as vulnerable, as declining, as the weak link in his own celebration. This was an indignity he had never imagined enduring beneath the roof he built. When he finally rose to address the room, the applause that greeted him felt ceremonial rather than spontaneous. He steadied himself, not dramatically but deliberately, and allowed the silence to gather. His voice, when it came, carried fatigue but also steel. He spoke not of gratitude alone, but of exhaustion. Exhaustion with endless power struggles, with boardroom rivalries masquerading as family debate, with the constant battle over control of Forrester Creations. The name that had once unified them now divided them. He confessed a weariness deeper than physical strain. He was tired of watching his children and grandchildren measure love through leverage and loyalty, through ownership stakes. The shift in tone unsettled the room. This was not a nostalgic patriarch reflecting on success. This was a man confronting the cost of his own creation. Eric's gaze moved from Ridge to Steffy, from Brooke to Katie, as if silently acknowledging the roles each had played in sustaining and complicating the empire. Then, with a steadiness that stunned even himself, he delivered the declaration that would fracture the evening beyond repair. Forrester Creations, he announced, would be sold. The fashion house bearing their name would pass into the hands of an anonymous foreign conglomerate. The decision was final. Silence descended like a physical force. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Glasses hovered in uncertain hands. Ridge felt the words as a blow to the chest. For decades, he had poured himself into preserving and evolving the brand, navigating market shifts, defending creative integrity, clashing with competitors who underestimated their resilience. Steffy's breath caught in disbelief. She had sacrificed relationships, endured betrayals, fought for the company's future as if it were an extension of her own heartbeat. The notion that all of it could vanish overnight into the portfolio of faceless investors was unthinkable. Their shock was not merely professional. It was existential. Forrester Creations was not an asset, it was identity. Without it, who were they? The weight of Eric's words pressed down on them, transforming celebration into mourning within seconds. Guests avoided eye contact, unsure whether to console or withdraw. The grandeur of the mansion now felt oppressive, its opulence mocking the uncertainty blooming in every corner. Ridge stepped forward instinctively, seeking clarification, but the authority in Eric's posture silenced him. This was not a negotiation. It was a proclamation. Steffy's mind raced through implications. Contracts, creative direction, workforce security, legacy erased by corporate restructuring. The empire they had defended so fiercely stood on the brink of absorption. In the far corner of the room, partially obscured by a marble column, Bill watched. His expression betrayed neither outrage nor sympathy. Instead, a subtle curl touched the edge of his mouth, a smile too restrained to draw immediate suspicion yet too deliberate to be accidental. Bill had always thrived in moments of upheaval. Chaos was not something he feared, it was terrain he mastered. Where others saw catastrophe, he saw opportunity. As murmurs swelled, Bill moved with calculated calm toward the center of the room. His footsteps were unhurried, confident. When he reached Eric, he did not interrupt, he simply stood within view, allowing curiosity to build. Then, in a voice that cut cleanly through the confusion, he revealed the truth. The anonymous conglomerate was not foreign strangers. It was him. He had orchestrated the acquisition, secured the controlling stake, and finalized the transfer. Forrester Creations now belonged to Bill Spencer. The impact of his revelation reverberated like an explosion. Ridge's disbelief morphed into fury. Steffy's shock crystallized into something colder, calculation mixed with betrayal. The humiliation of losing their empire was compounded by the identity of its new owner. Bill was not a distant investor, he was a rival whose ambition had long clashed with their values. His satisfaction was not subtle now. It was deliberate, unveiled, almost triumphant. Eric's expression flickered, regret, defiance, and perhaps a sliver of relief. In selling to Bill, he had not relinquished control to strangers. He had handed it to a man whose ruthlessness he understood. Whether that understanding was strategic or misguided remained uncertain. To Eric, the sale represented liberation from endless internal conflict. To Ridge and Steffy, it felt like betrayal disguised as pragmatism. The room's silence thickened. Guests realized they were witnessing not just a business transaction but a seismic shift in power. Bill's acquisition was not impulsive, it was surgical. He had waited for vulnerability, for fatigue, for the precise moment when Eric's disillusionment outweighed resistance. In doing so, he exposed the fragility of legacy when confronted with calculated ambition. Ridge's pain was palpable. Every collection he had overseen, every runway show that carried their signature aesthetic, every battle fought to preserve creative autonomy, now subject to Bill's corporate philosophy. Steffi felt an equally visceral loss. The brand had been her battlefield and her refuge. Now it was territory conquered. Yet beneath their outrage, another emotion stirred, recognition. Bill had exploited divisions within the family. Their infighting, their inability to present a united front, had weakened them. Eric's frustration with those conflicts had opened the door Bill walked through. The sale was not merely Bill's victory, it was the culmination of years of unresolved tension. Bill's final words that evening were measured but unmistakable. He spoke of modernization, of expansion, of global dominance. He framed his takeover as evolution rather than conquest. But the glint in his eyes betrayed something more personal. This was not solely about profit. It was about proving superiority, about demonstrating that no legacy was immune to his reach. As the party dissolved into fragmented conversations and stunned departures, the mansion no longer felt celebratory. It felt like a mausoleum for the past. Eric retreated inward, grappling with the consequences of his own decision. Ridge and Steffi stood side by side, united not by strategy yet, but by shared devastation. Brooke and Katie, earlier divided by concern, now found themselves confronting a far greater crisis. Bill lingered only briefly before exiting into the night, the city lights reflecting off his car as if affirming his triumph. He had secured the empire through patience and precision. Whether he had secured loyalty, stability, or peace was another matter entirely. The true twist lay not only in the acquisition but in its symbolism. In one calculated move, Bill redefined the power structure of Los Angeles fashion. He exposed how quickly tradition can crumble when ambition intersects with vulnerability. And as the Forrester family faced the ruins of certainty, one reality became undeniable: the battle for their legacy had not ended. It had merely changed hands. The silence that followed Bill's revelation did not dissolve when he stepped out into the night. It lingered, heavy and suffocating, long after the front doors of the mansion closed behind departing guests. What had begun as a tribute to 8 decades of vision and legacy had transformed into an irreversible transfer of power. And in the aftermath, the Forrester family found themselves standing not merely at the edge of change but at the edge of erasure. The chandeliers still shimmered above them. The champagne glasses still lined the tables. Yet the room no longer felt like a home. It felt like conquered territory. Ridge was the first to move once the shock subsided into something sharper. Anger surged through him not as a reckless outburst but as a cold, focused intensity. He had spent his entire adult life defending Forrester Creations, protecting its creative soul from dilution, ensuring that its name meant artistry rather than mere profit. To see it handed to Bill, a man whose empire thrived on acquisition and domination, felt like watching a masterpiece stripped of its signature. Ridge's pain was layered: betrayal by his father, humiliation in front of peers, and the terrifying realization that decades of devotion could be undone by a single contract signed in secrecy. Steffi's reaction was quieter but no less fierce. Her mind raced with calculations, contingencies, possibilities. She understood corporate maneuvering, knew that power rarely changed hands without opportunity for counterstrike. But this was not a hostile takeover from a distant competitor. It was a strategic ambush from someone who knew their vulnerabilities intimately. Bill had not simply bought a company. He had purchased leverage over their identity. Steffy felt a mix of fury and reluctant admiration. He had waited patiently, exploited fatigue, and struck at the precise moment Eric's disillusionment peaked. Eric, meanwhile, retreated into an armchair near the fireplace, the weight of his decision settling visibly upon his shoulders. For all his authority in announcing the sale, he could not escape the tremor of consequence now echoing in the room. He had convinced himself that selling would free his family from endless internal warfare. He believed that removing the company as a battleground might restore personal bonds frayed by ambition. Yet as he watched Ridge and Steffy absorb the blow, doubt crept in. Had he liberated them, or had he dismantled the very foundation that united them? The line between sacrifice and surrender blurred in his thoughts. Brooke approached him cautiously, her earlier argument with Katie forgotten in the face of something far more catastrophic. She saw not the titan of fashion but the aging patriarch who had grown weary of watching his children fight. Katie lingered nearby, her expression reflecting a painful understanding. They both recognized that Eric's choice was born not of greed but of exhaustion. Still, compassion could not undo the consequences. Outside, Bill paused beside his car, gazing back at the illuminated mansion. He felt no guilt. What he felt was satisfaction sharpened by purpose. For years, he had competed with the Forresters, sometimes openly, sometimes strategically. Acquiring their empire was not an impulsive conquest but a culmination of long-term calculation. He had observed their fractures, their pride, their inability to compromise. When Eric's health began to waver and internal disputes intensified, Bill saw inevitability. He did not force the sale, he made himself the only viable solution. Yet even in triumph, Bill understood that ownership did not guarantee obedience. Ridge would not quietly accept subordination. Steffy would not relinquish influence without resistance. The real battle, he knew, was only beginning. The following morning, Forrester Creations buzzed with confusion. Employees arrived to find security protocols updated. Corporate communications drafted with neutral language announcing strategic restructuring. Bill's name appeared in official memos with calm finality. Shock rippled through departments. Designers whispered. Executives recalculated alliances. The brand's identity, once fiercely independent, now hung in corporate limbo. Ridge entered the building with controlled fury. Every familiar hallway felt altered, as if the architecture itself had shifted allegiance. He was no longer the unquestioned creative authority. He was an executive within Bill's domain. The realization gnawed at him. Steffi joined him moments later, her composure masking a storm beneath. They exchanged a glance that required no words. Whatever their past disagreements, they were aligned now. Their legacy demanded defense. Bill arrived shortly thereafter, not flamboyantly but decisively. He convened a meeting in the main conference room, his tone measured, even reassuring. He spoke of expansion into new markets, technological innovation, global partnerships. He framed his acquisition as evolution rather than conquest. But Ridge heard only appropriation. Steffi detected subtle shifts in language. References to brand repositioning that hinted at altering the very aesthetic that defined them. As the meeting adjourned, tension crackled. Ridge confronted Bill privately, his voice low but edged with restrained outrage. Bill did not retreat. He countered with logic. The fashion industry was changing. Survival required adaptation. Sentimentality could not override strategy. He reminded Ridge that Eric had signed willingly. That truth cut deeper than any insult. The authority Ridge once relied upon had been relinquished by the very man who built it. Meanwhile, Eric remained at the mansion, grappling with isolation. He had expected backlash but not the hollow ache settling in his chest. Selling the company had felt like reclaiming control over his family's peace. Instead, it had fractured trust. He wondered whether Bill's promise of modernization would preserve the artistry he cherished or transform it beyond recognition. In quiet moments, he questioned whether he had underestimated Bill's ambition. Steffi refused to succumb to despair. She began mapping options, legal reviews of the contract, potential minority stake maneuvers, alliances within the board that might limit Bill's unilateral authority. She knew that emotional outrage would not reclaim power, strategy would. Yet beneath her determination lay personal grief. Forrester Creations was more than a workplace, it was a testament to her resilience. To see it absorbed into Spencer's empire felt like watching a piece of herself claimed without consent. Brooke found herself torn. She understood Bill's ruthlessness, yet she could not deny his brilliance. Part of her feared that resisting him outright would provoke harsher measures. Another part resented his audacity in exploiting Eric's vulnerability. Katie, pragmatic as ever, suggested that perhaps adaptation rather than opposition might preserve influence. The sisters' debate mirrored the larger family divide: fight or cooperate. Days passed, and Bill's presence within the company solidified. He replaced certain executives, retained others strategically, and introduced performance metrics that emphasized profitability over tradition. Ridge bristled at each adjustment. Steffy monitored every shift. Employees sensed the undercurrent of resistance and uncertainty. Yet the most profound shift occurred internally within the Forrester family. The loss of control forced them to confront uncomfortable truths. Their infighting had created openings. Their pride had blinded them to vulnerability. Bill's takeover was not solely external aggression, it was the culmination of internal weakness. Eric eventually summoned Ridge and Steffy to the mansion. His demeanor was subdued but resolute. He acknowledged their pain without retracting his decision. He explained that he had grown tired of watching them sacrifice relationships for corporate dominance. Selling the company, in his mind, removed the battlefield. Whether that battlefield would simply relocate under Bill's command remained uncertain. But Eric believed he had chosen the lesser of two evils. Ridge struggled to reconcile filial respect with professional devastation. He loved his father, yet he felt betrayed by him. Steffy, though equally wounded, saw opportunity in unity. For the first time in years, the Forresters were not competing against one another. They were aligned against a common force. Bill, observing their renewed solidarity, recognized the emerging challenge. He had acquired the empire, but he had also inadvertently unified its former rulers. Power, he understood, required not just contracts but compliance. And compliance from Ridge and Steffy would not come easily. As weeks unfolded, the battle shifted from public shock to strategic maneuvering. Bill leveraged media narratives, portraying the acquisition as a visionary merger. Ridge countered through design innovation, proving that creative genius remained irreplaceable. Steffy cultivated loyalty among employees, reinforcing that Forrester spirit transcended ownership. The mansion no longer hosted grand celebrations. Instead, it became a war room of quiet planning. Eric watched from a distance, recognizing that his attempt to extinguish conflict had ignited a different kind of fire. One fueled not by rivalry among his children but by determination to reclaim identity. And in the heart of Los Angeles, beneath the glossy headlines and polished press releases, a new chapter began. Bill Spencer held the empire on paper. But the soul of Forrester Creations, its artistry, its defiance, its relentless pursuit of beauty, remained fiercely contested. The takeover had been swift and ruthless. But the true struggle for legacy was only beginning. And no contract could guarantee its final outcome.
Oh.